Well, good afternoon. My name is Bronwyn Blake, and it is my pleasure to chair this afternoon's session of lectures during the 40th Annual Conference of the Australian Garden History Society. In the same vein as this morning's session, each presentation will last no longer than 30 minutes, and afterwards there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Should a paper run over time, we will proceed to the following speaker with the hope of question time at the end. So this afternoon, our first speaker is Fiona Eadie. Fiona, you can hold your applause to the end of the introduction. That's a sense of anticipation, isn't it, Fiona? So by way of introduction, before the applause, Fiona has worked with plants throughout her career. Since completing a degree in botany at the University of Otago, Fiona has undertaken native forest research, managed a native plant nursery in Auckland, and at present has the enviable job of head gardener at Larnach Castle on the Otago Peninsula. Deeply passionate about plants, in her spare time, Fiona also undertakes contract teaching for horticultural apprentices throughout New Zealand. She is a regular contributor to Commercial Horticulture. It's an industry magazine in New Zealand, a very good one, and has written 3 books on gardening with New Zealand native plants. Thank you, Fiona, for sharing your passion for New Zealand native plants with us this afternoon. Now you make her feel welcome.
Yeah. Well, guys, the story. And like all good stories, we need to start at the beginning. Once upon a time, there was a great land. It was called Gondwana land. Gondwana land had animals and plants that were very happy. They had a large country, there's plenty of food, it was warm, it was wonderful. The Dark Lords below weren't happy with this. They didn't like contented people. Plants are people, all right? Or animals. So they decided to do something about it. They decided to split the land asunder. It took time. They decided to start with to chop off a great big bit and send it westward. Those on that land were still too happy for the Dark Lords, so they split it in half again and made Africa and South America. Getting back to the rest of Gondwana land, they all still seemed quite content, so they decided they would fracture it further. India was sent off northward. Australia started to split. New Zealand was scared. And New Zealand decided it was time to move. New Zealand is a brave country. It's little, but it's brave. It's set off. I've just realised that the next slide is on here, not the one that's up, just so you know. Right. So you had nothing to look at then. But anyway, moving on. Here we go. New Zealand headed off into the great oceans. It was quite content. The Dark Lords didn't like the contentedness of New Zealand, so they decided to sink it. It was difficult. The plants and animals could only just survive. But it rose again, which was much better. And it wandered till it eventually found its home. It was a little bit chilly by this stage because Antarctica had decided to have its impact on the world. But the Dark Lords still weren't happy. Mountains rose, land was crashed together. The plants and animals had to survive all these changes. They threw in a few ice ages. Just because. Why were they still so content? But very little survived this journey. It was only the intrepid traveller that could manage this trip. And of this, there were very, very few animals. There was our little frog. who's quite cute. There are a few of them, and they are quite cute. And they survived because they were forest dwellers. And I love it, guys, remember this one, it was the male frogs who looked after the eggs in the forest. And guess who carried the tadpoles around on their back, and still do? Of course, there's few and far between now. Yes, males weren't good enough, eh? I'd like to say that, but it's not quite true. But we also have the tuatara, which is a little bit up for debate, but a beautiful animal if you love prehistoric things. And then our bird, the kakapo, is believed to have been here on the land when it was split from Gondwana land by the Dark Lords. He's a big parrot, 3.5 kgs, 400 grams bigger than the largest parrot in existence today. He's a long liver. He's a ground dweller. Now, sometimes this parrot, when he gets scared, he climbs trees, and he's forgotten that he can't fly, and he falls like a brick to the ground below. You'd think after 80-odd million years floating around in the ocean, you might have figured out you can't fly, eh? But he lives for 90 years, and maybe it's only the geriatrics that do this, I'm not sure. So really, what survived of the plants? Well, like you, we've got our podocarps. And we do quite a good line on podocarps. This is one at Larnach Castle, planted by Larnach, and they're going to go about 1870s. And we know that because the chop was topped out of it when power was brought in the 1920s. And there's a picture of it with the top taken out of it. So unusually, Larnach was out on his own at that time when settlers were coming to New Zealand, and that he wanted to plant New Zealand native plants. He didn't want to be reminded of home. So of the 5, we've got 5 very large trees. 7, 5. And 3 of them are New Zealand natives, planted by Larnach. And we have our Totoro. And that's actually a Totoro topiary, planted by Margaret Barker. And it's amazing what you can actually achieve with plants. Sometimes we get too scared to use our native plants and forget that they are just a plant and figure out what we can actually do with them. I don't know if you're the same in Australia as in New Zealand, but everyone in New Zealand believes that our native plants should be allowed to grow to their full potential, rather than they're a plant, and you can cut them if you want. All right? Unfortunately, we have some control over them. There was our Winteraceae, a pseudowintera, which was believed to have also been there at the time. And I'm going to say, if anyone suggests to you to take a bite of the leaf of this, walk away. It is very, very, very peppery and is used for culinary purposes in New Zealand now. And we have our beech, our native beech trees. And like you, the English decided that our beeches were nothophagous, because they were the new phagus. They like to take control, those English, eh? And it's just like they're the top of the world and we're the bottom. Well, actually, sorry, this time we're the top and you're the bottom. In New Zealand now, our native beech forests make up half the forests that exist today, but only 3 million hectares. And if you look here, you can see on the top is our forested areas of New Zealand pre-man. And then you get before European settlement in the middle, and moving down, we have it as it is today. We are very good at getting rid of anything that's big. We like to think that we need timber. And moving on to timber, we move on to the Kauri tree. We have beautiful Kauri in New Zealand. It is still under a little bit of debate as to whether or not it made it on the Great Voyage through the oceans, or whether or not it came latterly. I don't even know how they figure this stuff out, eh? I think it's to do with pollen and stuff. But, you know, how do they know when the pollen, whether it came flying over? Oh, actually pollen. You need seeds, don't you? Right, sorry, brainwave. And we have our tree ferns. And I have to say, we both do a good line in tree ferns, but we've picked it as a national emblem before you did. So we get to keep it, all right? So we are known as a country of ferns. Now, if you've got a country with only these few plants and animals on it, it's not going to be a great country. It's going to be a bit boring, and you guys wouldn't have had to come here to see what we have, because you could have just looked it up in a book. So then you go, how did everything else get here? So we had those that came along on vegetative rafts, they believe. And they carried, some believe, possibly even the tuatara, but there very probably were animals on board that survived. And then there was the wind. We were stuck in the middle of nowhere. The wind carries a massive amount of things within it that we don't really think about it. So light seeds can be carried in it, spores, butterflies, and birds dragged along. And as the birds are dragged along, they're carrying seeds with them. And the seeds they carry may not be in their beak, as this bird has supposedly got, but they may be on their on their feathers, all right? Their feathers, been carried on their feathers, and within them, in their droppings. I didn't think you want to see a picture of a dropping, eh? But moving on. So here we were, a country of migrants. Those that could come here and those that could survive. We were a weird country, though, because we were really missing mammals. We only have the bat. And all I could find was they believe the first bat arrived about 16 million years ago. So it's relatively new. So what happened then? Who fills all those niches that are filled by mammals today? And for us, it was our birds. We had the massive moa. And the only predator that had really existed in New Zealand was the harst eagle. How many of you have seen the harst eagle downstairs? Oh, God, guys, go and have a look. It's amazing. 10 to 15 kgs, biggest eagle known in existence. Wingspan, 3 metres. The wandering albatross, 3.5 metres. So it was huge. I've always thought I'd love to be around when moas were around, but the harst eagle died out when the moa was killed off by the Māori. Hey, come on, it's a big chicken. All right, 1400s, a couple of hundred years later, there was no moa left in New Zealand. Harst eagle's food was gone. But you do have that thing that the moa was the big herbivore, and you had that the little rock wrens became the mice. So the birds loved it. But the thing is, we need to understand now, we had birds, but what sort of birds did we actually have? Now, New Zealanders complain about our New Zealand native plants because we don't have lots of big flowery stuff. I go flowers, schmowers, all right? Why do we focus on a big flower? You know, flowers are only there for such a short period of a plant's life, but how many of you grow something just because of its flower? Either you're all lying or you're too scared to put your hand up. I'm going to go, humans have got these things for showy stuff. Really, we're just like a bird, eh? You know, birds like things that are showy. And so, you know, they like to that so that they can pollinate it. New Zealand ended up with no obligate nectar feeders. Birds that require nectar for the whole of their lives, for their existence, to get food. They arrived, but they didn't survive. And so at that point, it affected the plants. Because why is a plant going to produce a big showy flower that takes lots of energy when it can just produce a little one and no one really cares about it? So I go, for New Zealanders, as it's not the plant's fault, it's the animal's fault for why we don't have big flowers. You know? Everyone likes to blame the plants for everything, but it's animals that actually control things. So we do have a few, don't get me wrong. The Tikka Manhe, which I do love, and since I've moved to Dunedin, I've only known one person who can get it flowering down there. So I'd like to say that the flower here was from Larnach Castle, but I'd be lying. The greenery is from Larnach Castle. So we can grow it, but we cannot get flowers on it. We are not warm enough. But that's what keeps Dunedin the size it is, so I quite like that. So just tell everyone Dunedin's really cold, all right? It's very, very cold, all right? We don't want more people. Yeah, you can go to Australia, eh? Right. And so then we have our kakabeak. Now that red kakabeak there, people say it doesn't flower very much. At Larnach Castle, I would say that flowers for 9 months of the year. Now, if you're going to have a flowering plant, that's a flowering plant, completely. It's not even found down there. It's frost tender up north, but we can grow it at Larnach Castle because we're very special. And the Dark Lords like us. But I myself, I do love the white one more. But even of these plants, if we think about it in New Zealand, only 8% of our plants are pollinated by birds. So it's tiny. And our fuchsia tree, which I also love, largest fuchsia in the world, has amazing blue pollen. And when the bellbirds are feeding, they look so lovely because all their foreheads are covered in blue. It's like they've been off to the makeup artist. It looks quite good. And then they produce these amazing berries for the birds that follow. And sort of our kowhai tree, I sort of think of our kowhai a bit like your jacarandas for some reason. I sort of think it's our jacaranda, because your jacarandas are quite pretty. I have to own up to that one. But our kowhais are a lovely golden yellow rather than purple, all right? So, yeah, because that means it's a winner on the day. Now, looking back to when things arrived, Metrosideros was one of the early comers to New Zealand 60 million years ago. We've got 10 species of Metrosideros in New Zealand, and you have to think that those that came and could survive, it was an open palette. There was niches all over the place that they could fill. So we have 5 trees, but the forest grew, and so we have 7 vines. And our vines are quite stunning. That's a vine on the left, which is Metrosideros. No, I'm not very good at my left and right. It's on the right. And it's Metrosideros Carmenea. And it's stunning. And we've got little white ones. And watching them grow is a little bit like watching paint dry. So you just have to plant it and leave it. And that's another thing I think we forget in gardens. We want to plant for now. We want everything now. We're not planting for the future, for future generations. We want something big now. Now, I'm going to go, you can go big now if you're the age of my mother at 90, all right? From the time she was 80, I said you could spend money on big plants so you can see it now, all right? I don't think there's any 90-year-olds in here today. I'm making a rash statement here. But, yeah, I'm just going to go, well, I'm not 90 either. So, because she's my mother, eh? But anyway, we need to always be thinking that we're planning for the future, all right? We don't need to be planning for us to see it. Think of those future generations and get some of those wonderful plants that you've got, I'm assuming you've got some, into the ground, you know? Yeah, New Zealanders just don't do that. You may be just as bad. And talking about things that the world takes on, New Zealand is very slow, so they have this thing. Oh, God, time's going down. Radio. She told me I had to go on time. Is that we have our flaxes, which no one loves in New Zealand. The world's taken them on, but New Zealanders won't. You know, our Heebies, all right, arrived 3.7 million years ago from Europe, they now know, but we have got 80 of the 100 species known worldwide. So Heebies loved it in New Zealand. And then we go to our clematis. I love our clematis. I think our clematis, all those big pink flowers, and I hate pink, eh? But all those big pinks and purples and whatever, we have got the most delicate, beautiful clematis in New Zealand, which Europe has completely taken on board and formed hybrids, especially with this little marmoraria on the left. Oh, I got that one right. And they're fragrant. We've got fragrant Heebies, clematis. So why don't New Zealanders grow them? They don't even think about it. And then we go to our cabbage trees. When I get through to the button, You know, New Zealanders hate cabbage trees. I think cabbage tree should be our national emblem. It's found everywhere. And do you know what? People don't want it because it drops its leaves. Huh? Okay, it drops its leaves, you can pick them up, can't you? No, it gets caught in the mower. That's guys, all right? Guys, mower. You're the ones who stop cabbage trees being planted in New Zealand. But again, take it on worldwide. So the thing is, we had no obligate nectar feeders. So it was the little insects that did it. Little insects didn't fly very far. And the birds didn't really care. So when you look at this is a little ground cover Caprasma. And look at the size of its sex organs. All right? The little ground cover. But it's wind pollinated. Quite happy for insects to do it. But it's wind pollinated. And people don't like Caprasmas in New Zealand because they're twiggy, you know? But we do a great line of Caprasmas. We got 53 of the 90 Caprasmas in the Pacific and Australasia. They loved it here. They diversified. We've got trees down to that little ground cover. Another plant that was an early arriver was our Mirsini. 30 million years ago. Only ended up with a couple of species. So little flowers. What New Zealand does exceptionally well is plant structure. And you know what? You got structure all year round, not just when it's flowering. I do happen to have pictures though when they are flowering because you like to look at flowers. This is one of our native brooms. We do a great line in native brooms and they're leafless, very tolerant to arid conditions. We have this lovely one here, yellow flower, and the flower's quite big. And it has flowers off and on for much of the year. Do Kiwis want to plant it? No. Dracophyllums. Love. Try and buy one. Impossible, because no one grows them. Stunning plants. And the ultimate in New Zealand, I think, for structure has to be our pseudopanics, ferox, and crassifolius. They're just so structural with their juvenile form and their adult form. And the thing about it is they say that New Zealand, or the lancewood, has developed this because of the browsing of the moa. And that is the reason why we have so many twiggy plants in New Zealand, because the moa was the major browser of foliage. The lancewood, the pseudopanics, ferox, and crassifolius, very probably it was due to moa. Once it gets above 2 metres, 2.5 metres, the leaves become smaller and juicier outside of moa browsing range. On the Chatham Islands, there is also pseudopanics crassifolius, and it has no juvenile stage, no moa. So very probably it was an adaptation to moa. New Zealanders complain, as I said, about our twiggy plants, and the thing is about twiggy plants, they used to think it was because of moa browsing, but they've actually found out that very many of the twiggy plants that are in New Zealand actually came about after the Ice Age. So it was nothing to do with the moa. So many of them developed over the last 10 to 15,000 years. And if you take this into consideration, sorry moa, you had some effect but not all. The thing about it is they decided, or thinking at the moment, the theorising, is there was an adaptation to cold. The leaves in the middle were protected from the winds going by, and also very tolerant of dry, many of them, because again, the leaves were protected in the middle. Cold and heat, dryness. So that is the reason why we have a moderate amount of divaricating plants. But for me, they're so textural. They're beautiful. I don't know why New Zealanders don't see. You put the little Caprasma growing through this allopolyphylla. It accentuates the two of them. It's beautiful. The little Osothamnus. It's just stunning. And we ended up with our Alpine plants because the mountains crashed together. Little did the Dark Lords know that they'd created a whole new environment for the plants to thrive. And in New Zealand, it's only 1,500 metres as our alpine level. Whereas if you go to the Rockies, it is 3,600 metres. So we have a very low alpine line. and evidently I learnt this while I was doing this talk actually, so new fact, is need a mean summer temperature of 10 degrees Celsius to create the Alpine line. And in New Zealand, we are an island nation, so we have winds, and they keep it cool. Whereas if you go to a lot of the other mountains, large mountain ranges within the world, they are continental, so they have much warmer climate than what we do. So that is the reason why we have it. And I have to say, that was one of my great things about moving south, was to be able to have the alpine plants, which are almost impossible to grow in Auckland with its humidity and its rain. I love Dunedin's dryness, I have to say. We are a small country. We're smaller than you. All right? I'm going to go. When you look at it like that, we've got 82% endemic plants of our 2,300. You have got 85% of your 20-odd thousand. Now, if you look at those numbers and look at our size, you should have 79,000 plants. But you don't. You can see that my top's staying on very well. I'm a lady, you see. All right. So, but you have this, you see. New Zealand's got a lot of plants for a very small little island. But it's a very beautiful island. And I think that sometimes we forget, and you probably too, is that we are living in but a blip in time. And things change. And sometimes we change things. And humans don't like change. And we want things to stay as it was. New Zealand didn't have that choice at all, because we ended up with interlopers, and they were mammals. And they impacted on our birds, which in turn impacted on our plants. And in some of them, direct implication was on our plants. Now, you gave us something. And to give you a hint, this is its spread from the 1850s, all right? What do you reckon it was? All right, you got that one? Yeah, they liked it here, all right? They're twice the size. Oh my goodness, our plants have got nutrients. Our soils were rich. Their fur could grow. They could tolerate the cold. They loved it. Now, guys, you've given us some stuff, all right? But you've taken stuff from us, all right? Far Lap, excuse me, Crowded House, Russell Crowe, even Lord. My goodness, Lord, how on earth did you get to take her? I'm sorry, the Lamington's ours, as is the Pavlova, and the lolly cake, and the flat white. And I'm going to say, the Sydney Times in 2012, because you did so badly at the Olympics, they added in our medals and said Australasia got this much. I mean, come on, guys. Now, this is the worst one. New Zealand had a big referendum a few years ago about our flag. All right? Guess who did their flag first? And guess who copied us? I think you guys need to do a referendum on whether or not you should change your flag, and I'm going to go, good luck. All right? Ours didn't go well at all. I'm doing very well time-wise. All right, I hadn't practiced. It was a blind run. Anyway, so I'm going to go. There are things that we have taken from you, like I said. This Polystichums in New Zealand, we ended up with 15 different species out of a spore from you. 15. But I do go, there's some things that I do wonder and think that you can keep for yourself. And I have been wondering what you guys and how you make them these days, because when I tried to make one, I couldn't have enough corks because I didn't have enough money. So I had to go the tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. But I quite liked it, but I thought you can keep it. Now, I've got 2 more points to say to you. They're quite important, and it's not too loud, is it? All right. Now, patting your plants is good. and actually scientific fact, all right? To go and pat your plants or hug your tree is a good thing because it actually stimulates their immune system. And I'm going to go, if you go and hug the person next to you, I bet you'd stimulate their immune system too. And I'm going to go as my last fact. And this is what I am most passionate about because this is where we are screwing up worldwide. And this, look at when this was said. And how much notice have we taken? Any country in the world? No one. And we forget that we are but an animal on this planet. And every animal is reliant on plants for existence. Who gets all the money? The animals. We think we're important. We're not. We can't survive without plants. Plants don't give a stuff about CO2. They care about their soils. So you need to start a wee ground wave. I'm trying one. It's a bit slow. Small club. But we need to think about our soils. And guys, look, 12 seconds. Yes! Yes, I'm the winner. That's it. All right? Yes! Yes! Wow! No one's got any questions, eh? See, I told you they wouldn't.
Any questions?
See, didn't I say?
Well, I'll start with one. So one of the things you do, as I mentioned, is teach. So what is the key message you give your students about New Zealand native plants? What's the one thing you want them to take away and nurture and take into their career as
I teach them more about how to grow them. I'm going to go with that. I guess my big passions are the soil environment and plants. I call it the dark realm because we forget about the dark realm. We forget so much that without it, plants can't exist. We'll prune off a diseased bit of plant and forget to even look. It looks good. Don't need to do anything more about it. But the bottom line is, that's not where the problem lies. The problem lies within the soil environment. 8 times out of 10, a problem with a plant is the soil. It's not to do with anything above ground. We tend above ground, we prune, we take off flowers, and we do all of this. But we forget that for the plants, when they first started on the planet 500-odd million years ago, the only way they could survive was with fungi and bacteria. They couldn't survive otherwise. So for 500-odd million years, they've been living with fungi and bacteria. And what do we do with ourselves? We fluff them up and we dig them over and we do all of this. And I just go, that's like taking all the people on the planet, throwing them up into the air every time you want to dig your ground, and hoping they land back in the right spot. It don't work. You know, plants got to make a new association with the fungi in the soil. It costs energy. Every time you dig your soils, they dry out faster. People say they grow faster if it's fluffy. Yeah, they will. But what are you going to do when you've got no water? It dries it. Organic matter dries. Try and wet a soil that's dry with full of organic matter. It takes 3 days. So your soil, and another really important thing about your soil is good proportion of plants' defences above ground come from the soil environment. Not from above ground. So if you've got a sick plant, plants are better than animals at defending themselves from pests and diseases. We're numpies in comparison. They're looking at how plants defend themselves from pests and diseases to see what they can produce for us, to try and stimulate our immune systems. So if a plant is sick, what you need to remember is it can look after itself as long as it's got the right amount of water, it's got the right amount of organic matter in the soil, it's not getting too much wind, it's got the right amount of light. It doesn't need you. Sorry. It would actually probably like you to bugger off. Really. And so when a plant is sick, you have to think what's wrong with its environment. Don't spray it. It's like an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. You just have to keep spraying. It's got sick for a reason. Help it out. That's my biggest thing. And I do go, my biggest thing with New Zealand native plants is probably I'm going to go a little bit like you. is that people are too hooked on what they can't grow rather than what's in front of their face. That's it, eh? As humans, that's what we want to do. But how many of you have fully experimented with what you have in your flora? You know, in New Zealand, nurseries is going downhill as to who's actually providing those plants. And why? Because you're not buying them. And why don't you buy them? They cost more money to produce because nurseries haven't even figured out how to grow half of them because no one wants to buy them. They want plants from other countries. Grass is greener on the other side of the fence. New Zealand now, the option is plummeting as to where you can actually purchase the odd special New Zealand native plants. It's going, nearly gone. And I suspect the same is happening in your country. And as I say to garden groups that I talk to, you are the ones that are controlling this. If you want something, you go to your garden centre and ask for it. It's you asking for plants that makes the nursery grow them. And then the retail nursery can sell them. But you're the guys with gardens. You're the ones in control. You're the ones that can change things and bring them back into production. Start it. The end. Yes.
Fiona, a modest question from a guy.
Yes, sir.
When we've mowed, you did the mowing thing with us. Well, I've got my Australian garden history and my gardening museum hat on here.
Yes.
Gum leaves fall on the cut grass. There's a second problem. It's no good mowing the gum leaves. So we invented a machine called a lawn groomer.
And that just...
It's a little brush that sweeps up the leaves and the gardening museum has just acquired its first...
No, I got to give you another option.
What's that?
Is actually, why do you need to sweep them up, and why don't you plant plants underneath that will survive in those conditions and
because
not have grass
the croquet
there?
ball goes off skew if you've got the...
You see? I like the idea of the groomer, but I just go, we need to plant appropriately. And then our maintenance goes down.
One more question.
I know that in Australia there was a time when Australian native gardens, bush gardens, were super popular in the 70s. Has there been a time like that in New Zealand?
I think New Zealand, in many ways, is coming into it now. There is, when I was in Auckland and I started there at the nursery in 1990, native plant gardening was really just starting. People just had their native plant garden and the rest of their garden, all right? So you didn't mix and mingle because you couldn't put the foreigners in your garden, you know? So there was separation. But over the 10 years or 11 years that I managed that nursery, there was a huge change within Auckland in terms of planting of New Zealand native plants, a huge change. I moved to Dunedin in 2000, or 2001, whenever, and when I got there, I was astounded at the lack of New Zealand natives being planted there. And I always go that it takes 20-odd years for a new concept to hit Dunedin. It starts in Auckland and it travels down the whole of the North Island quite quickly. And it gets down there, because it's good, say Highway 1, you know, it can fit a lot of traffic. Gets down to Wellington and it stops. Because there's Cook Strait there. It's very windy in Cook Strait. And it's got very, very big waves. And so you have this problem there, is that big waves and wind, and it gets stuck in Wellington for quite a few years before it gets the gumption to cross. And it'll get to Nelson because that's at the top of the South Island. And it sits there for a while because it's a long way down and there's big hills in the way. Now, sometimes it'll run down the east coast, west coast, hop over down by Haas Pass and come to Dunedin first, and then make its way back up to Christchurch. And sometimes it goes down the east coast and hits Christchurch and then Dunedin. But that's 20 years. And so in the last, I'm going to go 5 to 10 years in Dunedin, 5 years-ish, natives are being planted much more. And they're being integrated. And when I started at Larnach Castle, there were a few interesting native plants that were quite rare, which was enough for me to go there, like that Kamakeria Stevensonii, that beautiful weeping broom. And over the years, slowly convinced Margaret that people don't come to Larnach Castle to see plants they can see at home. They come to Larnach Castle to see New Zealand plants. And just because we can grow things well, and to us it's almost a weed, like the big fuchsia trees, to other people, tourists, they don't give a stuff about the Ace agricium with the lovely papery bark. What they want to know about is our fuchsia, you know? And that's what we forget. If you've got gardens that are on display, you know, they come to see your plants. They don't come to see what they've got at home, you know? Yes, you can have a few to remind them of home, you know, because they go, oh gosh, we can grow that at home, you know, oh, isn't it so sweet? You know, but they come to see your plants. They want to see what they've never seen before. That's why you're here. I have to say, nursery I managed in Auckland grew most of those plants that are out in that garden out there, that big native garden. So yeah, thanks to Fiona. Yep.
Well, I feel that New Zealand's future horticulturalists are in good hands. Thank you, Fiona.